Unit 18, Decision Support and the Whole Community. In this unit, we'll discuss the whole community approach to decision support and define the primary hazardous weather warnings. With the whole community approach, we want to discuss all the different groups that can have a stake in the preparedness aspect of hazardous weather. We'll describe population and coastal vulnerabilities and understand programs and initiatives that engage the whole community in confronting hazardous weather threats. So what is decision support? This is meant to be a somewhat rhetorical question. Everyone in this course should have a good idea of what this entails, but I'm curious to learn about how this may apply to each of your individual professions. Generally, aiding in the process of choosing a course of action in the face of uncertainty is at play when we discuss decision support. And ultimately, we're trying to reduce risk under time pressure in terms of being effective with decision support. Communicating rapidly evolving facts to the public and to public officials. That's, of course, one of the primary challenges of effective decision support. And also addressing the needs of the whole community during threatening weather. So in other words, this is more than just emergency managers and first responders. We're talking about local store owners, family businesses, and just a family unit. Everyone in the community that has a stake in preparing for hazardous weather. So what else does decision support entail? We can go around the room and discuss this. The whole community here, especially in the context of FEMA, we're talking about the groups beyond just our typical target audience when we talk about emergency management type training courses. We have individuals and families, including those with access and functional needs. We're including businesses, faith-based and community organizations, nonprofit groups, schools and academia, media outlets, and all levels of government, including state, local, tribal, territorial, and federal partners. So really, preparedness needs and can only be done in a whole community sort of way, including everyone at the table, discussing various strategies and tactics on how to best prepare for hazardous weather. The National Weather Service products that are available in advance of a hazardous weather situation can really be summed up in three primary categories. There's the outlook or the statement that can come in the form of hazardous weather outlooks issued by the local weather forecast office, or convective outlooks issued by the Storm Prediction Center, or tropical weather outlooks issued by the National Hurricane Center. These are all part of the ready phase, if we think ready, set, go being the three primary tiers of categories. A watch is when conditions are favorable for a particular weather hazard. It means to prepare for action. The weather event is not imminent yet, but the conditions are favorable for that to occur. In the case of thunderstorms and tornadoes, a tornado or severe thunderstorm watch would often be issued the day of, but a few hours before an actual imminent weather threat occurs. In the go phase, there are two primary categories, advisories and warnings. An advisory means that significant weather is expected, but typically of less severity than in the case of a warning. They're often nuisance conditions or situations where if preparedness didn't take place, it could be a threat, but it's not a major threat to life. Unlike a warning, where there's imminent threat from a significant weather hazard that has been observed or is about to occur, take immediate action. So the important thing to distinguish here is that the ready phase is the outlook and the statement, set would be the watch phase, and then go would be advisory or warning. Both of those, advisory or warning, are at the same level of imminence. So both of those, either one would be issued when the weather is imminent. It's just that one is of less severity than the other. This is better illustrated using this flow chart here. You see that in terms on the y-axis, you see the time until event. X-axis, the horizontal, you see certainty of event. And the outlooks is the routine products that are issued on a daily basis, depending on the weather hazard we're discussing. And then when conditions are favorable, we go to watches. And then when it is imminent, when a certain type of hazardous weather is imminent, then we're talking about warnings or advisories, depending on severity. In the case of convective outlooks, these were updated by the Storm Prediction Center in October, but essentially these still follow the concept of Ready, Set, Go, in the sense that outlooks are routine products issued by the SPC, based out of Norman, Oklahoma, to provide categorical as well as probabilistic forecasts of the risk posed by a certain type of severe weather. It can be severe weather in general, or it can be about tornadoes, severe hail, or severe straight-line winds. It can provide lead times from 1 to 8 days, with individual categories being posted for day 1, 2, and 3, but then days 4 to 8, it's considered more broadly, given the greater lead time. It quantifies the risk of occurrence within 25 miles of a given point, depending on whether we're talking about severe wind or tornadoes. Day 1 outlooks provide the most specific probabilities for tornado, hail, and severe wind. So there are individual probability products for that. When we look at severe weather watches, these are also issued by the SPC in Norman, Oklahoma. There are two primary types: severe thunderstorm watches, and those are outlined in blue in the left part of this figure. Then there are also tornado watches, also issued by the SPC. These are outlined in red typically. In exceptional circumstances, when violent tornadoes are expected, there's a type of tornado watch called the PDS, or the Particularly Dangerous Situation Tornado Watch. An example of this is shown here in this figure. These are typically reserved for the most violent types of tornado outbreaks that are expected within a particular area. When a watch is issued, the Storm Prediction Center will coordinate with local and surrounding weather forecast offices to determine the boundaries of this watch. And once this is issued, it will hit the airwaves, and then the local WFO is now in charge of issuing warnings if necessary. So they will be manning the radar and paying attention to the changing conditions in their local CWA. If severe thunderstorms or tornadoes are imminent, then their respective warnings will be issued. So a local WFO will issue a severe thunderstorm warning if there is a radar indicated or spotter confirmed hail of 1 inch in diameter or greater and winds of greater than or equal to 58 miles per hour. In the case of a tornado, it's also issued by the local WFO. It's also radar indicated or spotter confirmed tornado. So spotters are very, very important. They're the eyes and ears of the National Weather Service on the ground because, again, if we remember from an earlier module, radar is not easily used to observe the precipitation and the weather conditions right near the surface. This figure that you see on the right of the slide shows the fairly new polygon warnings. They've been in effect for years now, but they're new in the sense that we've improved upon it. Previously, before the polygon system, we were issuing warnings on the whole county. But because counties are irregularly shaped, it makes more sense as a storm is moving across several counties to zero in on the primary threat area a little bit better by using polygons. The National Weather Service has been gradually rolling out across different states throughout in recent years impact-based warnings. These are warnings that are intended to outline the specific impacts of concern to the area inside the polygons with greater detail. And so here's an example of the tornado tag. If a tornado is radar indicated or observed, that will be specified in the warning. And depending on the radar signature and based on spotter observations, the meteorologist is also able to indicate whether they expect considerable damage or catastrophic damage. And this is also included in the tornado damage threat tag. For severe thunderstorm warnings, a tag can be added that says that a tornado is possible if a severe thunderstorm has some potential for producing a tornado, although forecaster confidence is not high enough to issue a tornado warning. So this introduces a little bit more of a realistic representation of the threat associated with a particular warning. And ideally, this will give decision makers on the ground a better idea of the level of threat and the level of impact that is being expected from a particular warning. Now let's switch gears a little bit to talk about hurricanes. In the case of hurricanes, there are tropical weather outlooks, advisories, and discussions. These are all part of the standard forecast package that will be issued during a tropical cyclone situation. Again, as with the SPC, the NHC's tropical weather outlooks are issued throughout the hurricane season on a regular basis, regardless of whether there are any active tropical cyclones. The tropical weather outlook is intended to be a representation of the threat posed by any existing tropical waves or clusters of thunderstorms across the tropical oceans in the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, and the Northeast Pacific Ocean. And the outlooks are intended to provide a heads up on whether or not there will be formation of a tropical cyclone in the coming days. Now, once a tropical cyclone has already developed, advisories will be initiated, and these are a package of forecasts essentially specific for that tropical cyclone. And associated with them are discussions where you can actually read, as a decision maker, the thought processes behind the forecaster who issued that advisory package. That's a good way to humanize the forecast. When a tropical cyclone is threatening land, there can be a series of different watches and warnings. Tropical storm watch means that tropical storm conditions are possible within 48 hours. Tropical storm warning, it means that tropical storm conditions are expected within 36 hours. Now, with the hurricane conditions, or with a hurricane watch, it means that hurricane conditions are possible with tropical storm conditions anticipated within 48 hours. So the key thing here is, even though we're talking about a hurricane watch, same goes for a warning, we're actually talking about the onset time of the tropical storm conditions, because that's really when a lot of the preparedness needs to be completed by. And so, even though the watch and the warning means different things depending on whether you're talking about a tropical storm or a hurricane, the timing here is always in reference to the tropical storm condition onset. Extreme wind warnings can be occasionally issued. As rare, but the National Weather Service local weather forecast office can issue these if there's a landfall of the eye wall of a major hurricane is imminent, because in that situation, areas impacted directly by the inner core of the hurricane will be dealing with extreme wind. There are many different types of weather-related advisories. Another one is flood advisories. These are issued by the local weather forecast offices of the National Weather Service. We're using advisories here in a general way because this includes urban and small stream advisories, flood statements and warnings, flash flood watches and warnings. The important thing to remember is that flooding is one of the biggest weather-related killers around the country, with the vast majority of deaths occurring during floods inside vehicles. So the important thing to remember is never to drive a car into flooded roadways. And this is something that we as emergency managers want to communicate properly to our constituents. The phrase "turn around, don't drown" is often used by the National Weather Service to drive this point home. And that is when there are rising waters, it's often easy to assume that the depth of the water is drivable, but in reality it doesn't take much water to pick up an entire vehicle. And so the important thing is to remember never to drive through flooded roadways. Under winter weather, this is a challenging topic to discuss, but because it depends on the location of the hazard. When we talk about winter weather advisories, wind chill advisories and warnings, lake effect snow advisories and warnings, these are all dependent upon the local criteria established by the National Weather Service. Winter storm outlooks, watches and warnings, blizzard watches and warnings. These are all different because, again, as mentioned earlier, when we just define the definition, but when we discuss the definition of extreme weather, it depends on the climatology or the annual average of an area. So, for example, a wind chill advisory criteria, the threshold would be a lot higher or warmer in a place such as Florida compared to a place such as New York. The same is true for all of the other winter weather advisories and products. So I would really encourage everyone to get to know, if you don't know already, the definitions of winter weather products in your jurisdiction, and making sure that you're in touch with the National Weather Service office that oversees your county warning area to make sure that those definitions are understood by your constituents and your partners. For more information, we would highly recommend looking at the book called Extreme Weather by Bonnie Schneider. In past years, we've offered this as a pre-reading. This book is available, and we'd also encourage everyone to view and to study the web pages of the National Centers for Environmental Prediction and cep.noaa.gov, as well as visit your local National Weather Service Weather Forecast Office webpage. You can simply go to weather.gov and click on the location on the map, and it'll take you directly to the website for your local office. For those who are really interested, the National Weather Service products are also accessible in the link to their directives. This outlines all of the specific details and definitions for each of the products. When we talk about vulnerable populations as one of our focus areas, we're discussing many different groups. So one is low-income neighborhoods. For example, 80,000 public housing residents in New York City were without power for over 2 weeks after Hurricane Sandy. And then if you think about the vulnerability of that location, not only were so many people without power, but this was also at the tail end of October, early November timeframe when the weather's getting cold. And as temperatures drop below freezing after Sandy passed by, situation got pretty dire in places without power. So we have to consider these when thinking about decision support in the whole community. The elderly and the special needs, racial, ethnic minority groups. How do we deal with the fact that some people do not understand in English the weather forecasts and warnings that are being issued? Hospitals and nursing homes have special situations with a lot of vulnerable people confined in a certain location. Industrial areas may have hazmat concerns if containment facilities become damaged. And here's an interesting statistic: about a third of the deaths during Sandy were seniors. And so we have to consider these when we talk about decision support in the whole community. How do we reach out to vulnerable populations? What is the best way to convey risk to these groups? And also to help better communicate the threats associated with hazardous weather. Coastal vulnerability is one that is particularly of concern in the 21st century as sea level rise becomes a bigger and bigger problem. 39% of the U.S. population lives on the coast, according to 2010 statistics. 34.8 million population increase along the coast has occurred during the last few decades. Global sea level rise is something that is being projected, and it can range anywhere from a few inches to several feet depending on the location along the coast, because sea level rise is not a uniform phenomenon. Some places will have more sea level rise, others will have less. And on top of that, you'll have sea level changes depending on El Nino and other types of natural climate variability. Here's a picture showing the different parts of the coastline and the relative changes in population. And as you can see, all up and down the eastern seaboard, through most of the Gulf Coast, we're talking about pretty major increases in coastal population. Now, think about hurricanes. As of the year 2015, we have not had a major hurricane landfall in around 10 years. And so, since 2005, that was the last major year where the United States had to deal with multiple hurricane landfalls. Since then, it's been more sporadic. We've had a few landfalling and near landfalling tropical storms and hurricanes. And Sandy, of course, was a major impact, but we haven't had a Katrina, Francis, Jean, or Charlie type hurricane landfall since 2005. And so a lot of the coastal vulnerability comes from rapid increases in population, and the people moving in do not understand the hurricane threat that they face each year. Unfortunately, statistics will catch up to us eventually, and we will have more hurricane events along the coastline. And so right now, more than ever, we have to focus on the coastal vulnerability issue. when we look at the trends in the last several decades of U.S. property loss versus loss of life, there is some good news to this, and that is with the improvement in the science of hazardous weather and the preparedness, we're doing a better job of saving people's lives with respect to hazardous weather, and especially with respect to hurricanes. With the exception of the decade in 2000, where Katrina occurred and there was a huge spike in deaths. Other than that, the trend has been gradually downward, which is good. We've been saving more and more lives as the years go on. However, U.S. property loss has been exponentially increasing. This is due in part to rising coastal populations, as well as just having more stuff to damage in that area. And so, unfortunately, weather disasters will become more and more expensive for our country, so we have to think about resilience long and hard when it comes to looking into the future. To do so, the National Weather Service, since 2011, around then, has focused on the Weather Ready Nation initiative. This was actually launched in August 2011, in part due to what had happened with the Joplin tornado in Joplin, Missouri, a city that was devastated by an EF5 tornado. Before that event, it was pretty much assumed across the field that the age of triple-digit tornado deaths in one event are over, and that our forecast and warning processes have become good enough to be able to prevent major chaos and death in a community. However, with Joplin tornado killing well over 100 people, we ended up realizing that there's still more work to be done, particularly in bridging the gap between science and decision making. And so, with the Weather Ready Nation initiative, in part, was founded after that event. The idea is to incorporate more social scientists into the dialogue, to figure out how best to motivate people to make the best proper decisions when given certain information, particularly when that information is of the scientific or uncertain variety. The WRN initiative is to improve technology, form partnerships, and increase public awareness to protect, mitigate, respond to, and recover from weather-related disasters. This is very similar to the mission of FEMA and to emergency management community in general. Ultimately, this is to improve our communication of risk and impact and to improve our outreach to partners. We want to reduce risk and increase community resilience, and it requires involvement from the whole community. So those of you who are active in terms of communicating with the National Weather Service, you'll notice that there'll be more and more outreach efforts, more and more training. And part of what we're doing is to help bridge that gap between decision makers and those making forecasts. And so individual WFOs will be reaching out more, and then you'll also see more people try to help raise public awareness of hazardous weather in the coming years. This has been the case since before the Weather Ready Nation initiative. In terms of warning coordination meteorologists being the primary contact for decision makers in a county warning area. So warning coordination meteorologist, WCM, coordinates the National Weather Service decision support services for severe weather and floods within EOCs and EOPs. The process in which this is done includes a lot of different mechanisms. Essentially, WCM is the liaison between the National Weather Service and other groups. So IPAWS, WEA, EAS, all of these systems and processes such as presidential disaster declarations. The WCM helps with decision support in all of these areas. Community preparedness, they will go out and hold spotter training courses. They're in charge of the StormReady Program, so they help to review the applications. Offices will often, in certain states, will also hold monthly awareness and preparedness campaigns, and the WCM is often in charge of these events. So the StormReady Program is something that a lot of communities have participated in. It's a voluntary program to assist local leaders and emergency managers to increase community preparedness and safety. It involves an application process, and when you meet the requirements outlined in the application, your organization, your community, can be deemed storm ready. And this essentially is a mechanism whereby your organization can be more in tune with your local National Weather Service forecast office. Provides guidelines to increase hazardous weather preparedness and response. For those who are curious, the link to the StormReady requirements are stormready.noaa.gov. And the WCM in your local office can be contacted through that website or through the local WFO website as well. So I would highly encourage everyone to reach out to the local weather forecast office and to inquire about the StormReady program if you are not already StormReady certified. Earlier I mentioned that WCMs can help with the spotter training program. SKYWARN is a network of 290,000 volunteer storm spotters who report severe weather to the National Weather Service. They're the eyes and ears of the Weather Service because, again, as we've said many times now, radar is limited in terms of its ability to understand what's going on right at the ground. However, of course, the National Weather Service does not endorse or encourage anyone to go out and chase severe weather because that is not the safe thing to do. But for those who are already volunteering in the field, who are in a position to be able to observe severe weather, then this can be a very helpful process in order to enable forecasters at the National Weather Service to issue the proper warnings at the proper time. There are locally organized groups that often consist of public safety personnel, emergency managers, amateur radio operators, and the WCM administers this program. Local training is hosted by the local WFO. So at this point, most of this training is local. It's tailored to your local community, so that's the benefit of it. Although weather, the basic principles of weather are standardized around the country, all disasters are local, all weather is local. And so there are different details and impacts that you would be able to obtain from a spotter training program that you couldn't obtain from a national training course. Spotter network is a good way to be able to track the spotters in the field. So this is something that if you're interested in learning more about, please just type that into Google, and there'll be plenty of more material out there for you to investigate. With that, we'd like to go to an activity where we'll explore the different websites from the national centers, including the National Hurricane Center, the Storm Prediction Center. These are all national centers that provide a lot of useful resources, but we don't really hear about them. And so the purpose of this activity is to just spend some time to explore the websites, and in groups we'll discuss some of the pros and cons to some of the products, when they could best be used, and essentially this is a good chance to familiarize ourselves with the website products before an actual event occurs.